And again, that doesn't matter what brand of machine, this is universal. I then take my bobbin case and I want to make sure to snap it. Okay, so can you see what we're talking about here? You can see those little pokies right in the point. You don't see them in the curves. It might see. Hello everybody and welcome back to the Quilters Apothecary. So today we are doing part 2 of our tension tutorial deep dive. So with this, a few things that I want to add to what we were talking about during the last episode. I have two different types of machines that I run in my studio. I have machines that use a disc tensioner, and I also have some machines that use the rotary tensioner. Now, a few things that you kind of have to do some testing with when you're having one of your tension days where you load a little bit of fabric on and you grit all your threads and you do some play to figure out good tension. Again, that's something you should do at least once a year, even if you're a seasoned quilter, just to kind of refresh you and to check all your tension stuff like we're going to do here. But with the rotary tensioner, on the specific machine that we're going to be utilizing for that I have in my studios, the Innovas, when I wrap the thread around the tensioner, I typically don't do the 3 times that they suggest, wrap, wrap, wrap around the spring and then under. I'll usually do 1 wrap under and over. I find that that works well for me. We want to remember that, you know, if you want to follow the manual to exactly, that's great. That's for you. But what I find personally is that for a lot of the decorative threads that I use, that 1, 2, 3 is a little bit too much tension on my thread, so I'll do 1. And the whole point is, it's your machine now, and you get to do it the way that works best for you. So that's what I'm saying is, don't do it my way, don't do it their way, but do a little bit of exploring so that you can figure out which way your machine likes to do it. And then that makes you obviously a little bit more compatible with the specific machine that you have. Now, the other thing is this, with the disc tensioners, of course, when you normally thread the machine, for example, I'm a tie-oner whether I'm doing disc or whether I am doing rotary. And what I mean by that is I'll tie my thread on and pull it through. So let me take you over to our other machine and let me just kind of show you exactly what I'm talking about. So of course what I do is break my thread on the spool that I was using, and I want to make sure to leave a nice tail. And then what I do is I simply grab my new spool of thread and I put it on. And then I'm going to go ahead and just do a little slip knot or just a little 2-finger through and pull, just like this. And then I'm going to walk around the machine. I'm going to make sure the thread is not caught underneath the thread spool holder. Then what I do is I pull my thread through. And I pull it through, it's going through the take up lever. Now I do something that I'm not going to suggest you do. I just pull right through, and also notice that when that knot goes around the disc tensioner, now this is definitely for the disc tensioner, it can pop out and lay against the disc tensioner. So I want to make sure to scissor that right back in to my disc tensioner. Always with the disc tensioners, once you pull thread through, your knot can knock it out of that disc tensioner, and so you want to scissor it right back through that disc tensioner so you know it's in place and you're not going to be ripping out a whole bobbin's worth of quilting. I have one of my machines which is such an oddball out of all the machines I've ever had, that what happens is the thread throughout my quilting process will actually pop out of the tension disc and kind of lay against the backside of the tension disc, which means I'm not having any tension on my thread. And that's happened a few times to me. That means I've got to grab my seam ripper or my, however you choose to unquilt and take out that bobbin's worth of thread. And hopefully it's something that you catch pretty quickly. So that being said, I found out that with that particular machine, I called a friend of mine, Kim Bruner, and what she said is, yep, every once in a while I have a machine that does the same thing. And so with that particular machine, when I'm using whatever thread is doing that, what I do is you would treat it like a rotary tensioner, but I only wrap it once. So what I do is I go back behind the discs, slide it through, and then around the discs one more time, and then follow the normal path. So in other words, it's not just back around the discs, put it in the discs, and then follow the path. It's wrap once, then go around and follow the path. And that, of course, is going to keep it in those discs. Now with that machine, that means that I'm going to have to adjust that tension accordingly, just like we're going to see here. So that really is a rarity. It's not something that happens all of the time, but it is something that occasionally happens with some people. So if you have that particular issue where your thread keeps popping out of the tensioner, if you're using a disc tensioner, then go ahead and do a full wrap and then readjust your tension accordingly and adjust your tension the same way that we're doing here. The one thing you won't be readjusting is your bobbin tension. Your bobbin tension stays consistent with the way that I told you. The other thing to remember is if you're on a quilt and you are going to change bobbin thread types. I know I'm consistent with one type of bobbin. I always run isocord in my bobbin no matter what's on top. But if you are someone that's going to bounce around from, like, let's say a 40 weight poly to a cotton to something else in your bobbin in one quilt, that you will have to every time readjust your tension, because a different weight of thread in the bobbin is going to mean it's going to run differently on that drop test. Your bobbin tension then is going to change. It will not stay the same. So with that being said, let's head down to the quilt and let me show you some examples. I'm going to be starting off with my basic, which is the isocord on top and the isocord on the bottom. Now, even though I exclusively run isocord in my bobbin, this is going to work no matter what you run thread-wise. This is how you test. That being said, I find that typically if I'm running my isocord in the bobbin, if I have isocord in the top or glide in the top, it pretty much means that I won't be adjusting my attention too much, if at all, usually not at all. So just know that. All right, let's head down to the quilt. So the first thing I'm going to do before I ever put my bobbin case into my hook assembly on my machine, what I'm going to do is I always do my test. Every time I change my bobbin, I grab my thread. It just takes a few seconds, and I do my test to pull the thread and check the thread every single time. And then I'm going to head over and I'm going to pop it into the case, and I'll show you what I do then. And again, that doesn't matter what brand of machine. This is universal. I then take my bobbin case and I want to make sure to snap it in. I always want to hear that audible snap. And I always take my thumb, it's in my muscle memory now, and I just jiggle to make sure everything's seated. What I also do is then, and even if this is under the quilt sandwich, because once you're seasoned, you can actually change your bobbin very quickly, even if you're in the middle of a quilt sandwich. Reach under and do it without even looking. I grab my thread and I give it about an 8-inch pull. And I want to feel that same nice smoothness that I felt when I did my drop test. So that's number 2. And then I go over my quilt and I get set up, and then I'm going to show you the last simple test before I start testing my tension. Okay, so the last thing that I want to do is I want to go ahead and pull up my bobbin thread. So wherever I'm at on the quilt or on your tester, I pull up my bobbin thread, grab it, and I grab that tail And what I like to do is I like to give it about an 8-inch pull. And I want to feel that smoothness. So again, once I pull that up, and by the way, I don't let my machine go back there. I keep it right where it came up, right in the fabric. And I just give it a nice pull. And I want to feel smooth as that's coming out. Again, smooth. If I'm pulling this and I feel any resistance or tugging or pull stop, pull stop, pull stop, that type of feeling, then something's probably going on. And frankly, again, that is like a 2-second test to see, did your thread accidentally get wrapped around the little finger? Do you have a warped bobbin? Do you have a warped bobbin case? That test right there is always going to tell you. And then once I feel that, and if it feels smooth, then I take a few little anchor stitches, just like that. Okay? Now, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to trim that long part of my tail and get that out of the way. So the next thing that I want to do is let's talk a bit about where we want our stitches. Now, before, this is where we want our stitch. We'll get there in just a second, but let me reiterate again while we're at the machine. Right now, if you were to walk up to your machine, unless you've tested same thread, same bedding, all that, you have no idea where that stitch is. Again, top thread, bobbin thread, just like that, in your quilt sandwich. It could be in the wrong place, which would be near the middle or near the bottom. Because remember, when we quilt and a stitch is stitched into the quilt like this and we remove the quilt from the frame, and even for our sit-down quilters, when you lay that quilt out flat the first time, threads are always going to sink a third to a half a way in. So if our thread is anywhere between the halfway point, this would be the quilt top, this would be the quilt backing, and this would be the batting in here. If your stitch is anywhere between the middle and the quilt backing, what'll happen and what can happen is when it does sink down in, it'll go out the back and you're going to end up with pokies, or you're going to end up with the horrible railroad tracks if it's way close to the backing of the quilt. And the thing that we need to remember is 100% of the time the threads are going to sink once the quilt's removed, or on a sit down, the quilt is laid out flat for the first time. Okay, so again, where we want to bring the stitches are just below the quilt top. This is kind of the perfect place. We're about 3/4 of the way up into the batting sandwich. Okay, so that's just something to know. And once you know that, you're home free. So we've got our stitches locked, and what I'm going to do, Mr. Ritchie, if you go in really tight on that needle. Okay, so now here is the test. I'm going to start with curved zigzags. I want zigzags because in the points of a zigzag is where I'm going to start to see any points. Now, here's the thing, and this is something that I wanted to share. I have a dark bobbin in, dark black, and I have a dark thread color in the top. How am I going to see the pokies? I'm not. So obviously when we're quilting, we do match our thread colors top and bottom. So what I want to do to test and to get good tension if I'm off on the side, or having, again, like I said, that play day with your different threads to do the tension, is I want to put a light thread in the top to contrast to the dark thread in the bobbin. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to change this dark thread to a light thread. But I wanted you to see that what we have here, you can't see the pokey. So as you can see, I have my black bobbin and I have white thread on top, just so that we can see exactly how we are adjusting things. So I'm going to start again with my zigzag. Now with that zigzag, what happens at first, of course, I've just loaded that thread and I can't see any pokies. And where I'm looking for the pokies, the first place they're going to show up is in the points, not in the curve. So I'm looking, that's why I have you do that curve zigzag as a test. I'm looking for pokies here in the points. Now, the reason I want pokies right now is so that I know where the thread is. Because right now, again, you're just mind reading. You can't look here and look underneath and say, oh, that's great tension, because you don't know within that sandwich where that thread is, because you don't have x-ray vision. You're not Superwoman or Superman. And so again, what I want to do is know where that connector is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my tensioner and I'm going to turn it one full turn. And now I'm going to start again tighter. So I want to tighten it clockwise. And I'm going to go ahead and do my curved zigzag. Now I'm going to stop. I put my glasses on and I'm going to look right there in the point. I almost am starting to see a little bit of black pokies. I don't want loops, but I do want to see pokies. So I'm going to tighten it again, half to a full turn. Once you start seeing a little smidge, then tighten it about a half or a full. Now when I look at that, now I can see my black pokey. So now that tells me I've pulled my thread up to the top. Okay, so let's squeeze in on this, Mr. Ritchie. Let's get a good visual. We can see our pokies are starting to appear right in our points. So now we know that the thread has been pulled up to the top and a little bit too far through. Well, now we know. We know where the thread is. That's the whole point. We want to first over accommodate, and then once we see it, now we're going to back it off a hair. So now I'm going to back off my tension, half of a turn. And I still see a little bit of pokey there. So I'm going to back it off another quarter of a turn and continue to do my test. And I will do that until I see that pokey just disappear in the point. So now what I see is my pokey has disappeared. What you see here on the camera that looks like pokies, it's not. It's just simply shadows from the needle hole. Okay, I don't have my cruise on. I'm on my older Innova, and so you're going to get a few long stitches there, just so you notice that. So again, I'm going to go ahead. Let's test that. Now I'll do a little bit more test. Do some swirls. I still see a little bit of pokies, so I'm going to back it off about a quarter of a turn. Now that looks nice. And so that's how you're going to adjust your tension. And again, I can back it off a little more. And that's perfect. Now what I see is that my pokies have all disappeared, so they're right below the surface of the quilt. So back to our illustration, that my stitch is right now on the machine, the stitch is probably right just under that quilt top surface. So I would probably do one more little adjustment, micro adjustment, a little bit lower. Yep, now that's perfect. And now I know that when the threads sink, once this quilt is removed from the frame, what'll happen is this stitch is going to sink once it's removed from the frame, and this stitch area is not going to be up towards the top. It's going to go down right about the middle or towards the middle. And then I'm not going to have pokies coming out the back, and I'm not going to have pokies at the top. And so with that being said, that is the basic tension test, which by the way, normally only takes 2 minutes, but I wanted to explain every step specifically. So now what I want to do is I want to show you doing that same exact test with other threads. Okay, so now I've changed my top thread to so fine, and I'm actually utilizing the so fine 50 weight because so fine comes in 50 weight as well as 40 weight. So now we're going to head down. Still using the isocord and the bobbin because I'm pretty exclusive with the isocord and the bobbin, as I've stated before. I will be changing that in a moment when we go into the micro quilter stuff, but right now I've got so line 50 weight in or so fine in the top. And that's not a thread I use a lot. I do tend to have people like the look because it tends to mimic the look of cotton. It's not a thread I typically use. And then I'm using the isocord in the bobbin. So now I'm going to go ahead, lift up my bobbin, get it out of there. And by the way, I have not changed my bobbin tension because with a regular thread, and I would consider so fine to be in the regular thread realm, my bobbin tension does not change. The only time I ever change the tension on my bobbin with my isocord is when I'm running sometimes invisible through thick fabric or metallic or a very fragile top thread. Then I might loosen it a bit, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so now I'm going to lock my stitches. Okay, trim my tail just a little bit. And I'm going to do the same exact thing. So if we want to zero in on that foot, I have not adjusted it from my previous testing. So it might be right on, might not be. So there again, no pokies with the so fine. So again, that tells me I don't know where the stitches are. So what I'm going to do is tighten it a full turn. No pokies. Tighten it again. I'm starting to see a little pokey, so I'm going to turn it again. Again, I never want to see loops, but I do want to see pokey. Okay, stop it. Let me grab my glasses. Let me go in here. Yep, there's my pokies. There's my pokies. So I know now where my thread is. It's up through the top. Now I'm going to back it off. So I'm going to back it off a half to a full turn. I still have my pokies. Now I'm going to go a little less, so like a quarter of a turn. Okay, that pokey is just about disappearing. Let me do a few little clicks. Now I'll do my little test with my swirls. So now my pokey has disappeared under the surface of the quilt top. And now I know that my tension for my so fine 50 weight and my isocord is perfect to run. I'm not going to have any issues with that. So now, again, this is how you're going to go through and test all of your threads. So the next thing that I'd like to do is all your regular threads, you're going to go ahead and you're going to repeat that exact test, right? Why are you doing this? Because you want to get more acquainted with that part of your machine. And a lot of times we get so used to running the same thread over and over and over and over again that we kind of lose that wonderful edge that we can have when we spend a day playing with all the different threads that we never use sitting on the shelf in our studio. Like I said, load on some practice fabric, go through, adjust your tension. It just helps you get that experience of adjusting and fine-tuning your tension quickly so that you can get good tension. And it also helps you to know if there's something going on with your machine. For example, do I have a burr? Do I have something else going on? Now, I'll tell you this, and this is my opinion. Let's call it an opinion. How often do I get burrs? Not that often. That just seems to be the go-to when someone's having an issue is, oh my gosh, I think you have a burr. Well, usually what I find is they just don't know how to do their tension well. Usually I find that unless I'm doing something crazy, like 5 quilts in a row with just metallic, right? Or a non-polyester invisible thread, like a nylon invisible. I only use polyester invisible. That's why I use the Superior monopoly on top, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Um, but typically, because I'm using a poly, I'm not going to wear grooves into any bit of my thread path. That's a rare. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. What I'm saying is it's pretty rare. Usually the first place it's going to show up is in that little tension spring that goes up and down near your tensioner. That's going to start to wear a groove, and then eventually it's going to snap and you're going to lose that and you're going to have to replace your tension spring. But that takes a long time usually. If you're going through tension springs quickly, then you're using some thread you might want to question. I know a lot of people use the nylon invisible thread. That can wear grooves very easily. And we never, I'm sorry, did you hear me? We never, 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 never run metallic or the fish line nylon invisibles in our bobbin. Bobbins are for thread, and the threads that I'm talking about are the polys or the cottons if you want to use cotton. Not a fan of cotton in my bobbin, but there you go. So that's something to keep in mind, because metallic and the nylon invisible in your bobbin, frankly, poly invisible, I wouldn't put in my bobbin. There's no reason. I want a nice sturdy thread, not something that could snap. Um, Nylon invisible or metallic in your bobbin is going to screw up your hook assembly before you even get a row of quilting done. That is going to wear a groove in your hook, and you are going to have a world of hurt because you're going to have to replace that hook, period, because it is so abrasive. It's fine on the top, but it is not fine in your bobbin. So that's just another thing. Okay, so now what I want to do, you know how to test and get acquainted with all your regular threads during your tension play day or just your regular adjusting. Now what I want to do is let's talk a little bit about metallics. Now I know for me personally, let me see, I utilize two different types of metallics. I have my Superior metallics, and I love my Superior brand metallics. I find that they run wonderfully. I typically do not have to adjust my tension using these. So when I use these two with my tension adjusted just like it is with my isocord, it runs fine. I find that I have no trouble. Again, I'm using isocord in the bobbin, metallic on top. But there are some metallics that I really like, some of the colors that Superior does not have. This is Filtech metallic, and I love this, and they have some really amazing colors that you can't find. With the Filtech, I find that I have to loosen just a smidge my bobbin tension so that when I do my drop test, what happens is when I grab the thread and I do my regular pull up, my bobbin case should not go all the way up on its side. It should go about almost all the way up, but just be a smidge more loose. And I find that that works best for some of the persnickety metallics. Those are the times when you have to make adjustments with the persnickety metallics, because once I adjust it, I have no trouble. But until then, that's where I can have the trouble. Now, another similar thread when we're talking about that would be, let me look, on my art quilts. When I'm doing really neat art quilts, I use a thread called Glitter, and it was made by Superior. There's another brand, Shimmer, I think is another brand, and it is that thread that's not thread. It's actually thin ribbon. And when I run that, again, I would have this on a spool holder. I wouldn't be running it through my cone holder. I would have it on a spool holder, and you want to make sure to run it right. And typically for me, that would be over the top on my spool holder. And when I run this, I find that I do have to adjust my tension and make my tension just a smidge looser. And what happens is, if I run my tension for persnickety threads like this, and that's the whole point. For me, these are a few persnickety threads. On your machine, they might run perfect by not changing your bobbin tension. But for me, what happens is because these are more fragile decorative threads, when I have my bobbin tension set at my regular tension and I utilize this thread, because the top tension is set tight enough to bring the thread up to the top, I find that that's a little too tight for the thread to be able to tolerate it. And so what I get is breakage. And I don't like any breakage. So I find that if I loosen my bobbin tension just a smidge, then I'm also going to be loosening my top tension, but I do the same test after that. I bring the thread up to the top, bobbin thread up to the top, and then I back it down a little bit. But because I've loosened my bobbin tension, what's happened now is I'm not putting so much stress on that fragile thread to pull it up into the sandwich. Because I know that with certain fragile threads, regular bobbin tension is just too tight. It won't tolerate it. One of the other questions that I often get, or statements or comments that I get, is I use my fingernail and I go under and I check my tension that way. And I say, hey, that's a great way to do it. But again, you don't know where that stitch is. I'm not saying don't do that, because I still do that because that's what I was trained to do 25 years ago when I got my first long arm. So again, I do always, when I have perfect tension, the way that I just showed you on top, I do always go ahead and, Mr. Ritchie, if you take me down, kind of on me, and I will go ahead and reach under the machine and I'll do my little feel on the bottom, scratch my finger. Does it feel good? Now, here's my problem if you come back to me. So my problem is this. I'm an old man, and there's a lot of man here as far as getting down on the floor under this machine and then having to get back up like I used to do during every quilt to check my tension every time. I can't do it anymore. And so doing the tension test and the tension adjustments the way that I'm showing you now just helps me not have to do that, because I'd have to have a Hoyer lift to get myself back up every time if I had to do that. So again, I do feel just to make sure nothing odd is going on down there, but that's not the way for me. I pull things up to the top, get a look at where it's at, and then I just back it down. And I've done enough of this, and that's why you want to play in the afternoon, to build that confidence of knowing how it feels, how it looks, all of those things. All right. So now I have changed. I have put metallic, superior metallic, in my top, and I still have my black isocord in my bobbin. Now, of course, normally if I were quilting on an actual quilt, what I would do is change to a gold isocord after I've done my test off on the side, little sample piece with the same batting weight as we've talked about in that tester piece of muslin. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to pull up my stitches, and then I'll have Mr. Ritchie come on down, as Monty Hall would say. I just aged myself, didn't I? Okay, so now I know pretty much that my metallic, superior metallic, is pretty much the same tension as my isocord. That's when it works well and I don't have any pokies top or bottom. But I want to just go ahead and show that. Now, I'm doing my zigzags. I see shadow, but I do not see pokies. So again, just like before, I'm going to tighten that top. One turn. Yep, there are my pokies. And I'm going to get Rich to come in here and so you can really see up close those pokies. Okay, so can you see what we're talking about here? You can see those little pokies right in the point. You don't see them in the curves. Might see one or two, but now you see the pokies. So now I know that I have to back off my tension, loosen my tension a quarter to a half of a turn, and then I know once I do that test again, and I'll have you zoom out just a smidge. That way they get a bird's eye view right from the crow's nest. See, now there is a little bit of pokey. Nope, that's shadow. Oh, little pokey. So let me back off my tension, about a quarter turn because it's real close. And remember, if you're using gold thread to match this in the bobbin, i.e. isocord gold, if you do get a little pokey, you're not going to be able to see it, but I want to have it darn close, pretty near perfect, if not perfect every time. Now see, now that's perfect. I'm doing a little bit of testing with my swirls because there's some nice points. The points are all the tests that you really want to do. If I were to just do like a dog bone meander, that's not really going to be giving me a good test because there are no points. I want to get some points in there to make sure that that stitch is, like we said before, just below the bobbin of the quilt, or I'm sorry, the top of the quilt. Okay, so now what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and I am going to change to invisible thread. So one of the things that I want to say about the invisible thread, I'll use the Smoke Invisible is, or actually I might use the clear invisible. I usually will use smoke if I'm on color fabric. So, but I'm going to use this. That way we can really see those pokies. So the one thing to remember for me personally, and you have to test with your machine, I'm still going to be using my 40 weight isocord here. But this might be a time where maybe you would be told, hey, I would use like a 60 weight with your invisible to get closer to the weight of the thin weight of the invisible. Because remember, invisible thread is like hair, right? Frankly, if I'm using invisible, I'm doing it in ditch work. So I want it to be stable. It's not like I'm doing micro work where I'm going to build up a lot of thread on the bobbin. I'm never going to be using invisible for micro work. So I use my 40 weight for my bobbin. If you're one of those that likes to use your Sofine 50 or your bottom line 60 in your bobbin, then you would substitute that and do the same type of testing. But I'm going to be using my Isocord 40 for my invisible thread. And usually I don't. On these machines or any of my machines at the studio, usually I don't have to change my bobbin tension. It's usually real good. But you might have a machine where you have to loosen that bobbin tension just a smidge to do that test where when you pull it up, instead of coming all the way up on its side when you do the pull up, maybe it just comes to almost all the way up. So it's still at a little bit of a slant when you do the pull up test. All right. Okay, so now, of course, I have the invisible loaded. So the one thing that I want to say is when I'm running invisible or the metallics or again any fragile thread, the one thing I don't do is pull any thread through the needle or just pull thread. What I typically do is go to the side here, grab a hold of the thread, and when I want to pull or give myself some slack or anything like that, I always pull down like this and move away. And that's also when I stop. So when I stop my machine and lock my stitches, I go ahead before I move my machine away to come back and trim thread. I always go ahead first and I pull slack down like this. I don't just move away because that's when you're going to get breakage and that can be frustrating. So that's what I have found that works well for myself. All right, so now we are with our clear invisible on top. I've got my 40 weight isocord just like I have with the others loaded. And so now if you want to go ahead and tighten in on that sew section, I'm going to go ahead, grab my bobbin, and I did loosen my tension so that I could show you my whole adjustment process. So I'm going to do some of my zigzags. So with the clear invisible, I have pokies. So I already am at the place where I have pokies in the point. So now I know that I want to loosen my bobbin tension. Another half a turn. And again, I wouldn't be using a dark thread in the bobbin usually unless it's like a black backing or something like that with this. And by the way, I also am usually with my custom, I have a double bat, so I have a little bit of leeway and thickness to kind of work with to adjust my tension. Okay, so my invisible thread, I'm almost there, not quite, so I'm going to back that off a little more. And there we go. So I've done that same adjustment with my invisible thread. So I'm going to bring Rich over here so he can show you. Okay, Mr. Ritchie. Okay, so here we can see that we have our pokies, and now we're loosening the tension to get rid of those pokies on top. And here we have a nice balance between our tension. So we know that our invisible thread is just a little lower than the quilt top itself into the sandwich, and it's going to sink nicely. I see a little bit of shadowing here, but I do not see any pokies. So we know that we have this adjusted properly for the invisible thread. Okay, so now something that I think is really important to talk a little bit about is I have micro quilter, and micro quilter is by Superior Thread. A lot of people like to use it for their micro work. Typically, I'll just go to 60 weight, but once in a while, yeah, for a show quilt, I might use the micro quilter. Now, the micro quilter is 100 weight. I'm not going to use this in the bobbin myself. You might. Some people might. And you'll notice that one of the other things we're not showing is silk thread. I'm not a big fan of the silk thread in my quilting. It's just not something that I would use. There's a lot of other alternatives that work best for me. So, but you would test the silk thread the same way that you've done all the other threads. So let's talk a little bit though about the micro quilter. So the micro quilter is a 100 weight thread. So this is one of the threads that I would actually change from my normal isocord 40 weight in my bobbin to a 60 weight in my bobbin. And typically the 60 weight that I'm going to be using is the Glide 60 weight. So I've wound a black bobbin from the Glide 60 weight. But when we utilize this, now we have a bobbin with 60 weight. Let me get this out of the way for a second. We have a bobbin that has 60 weight in it, but we've been running a bobbin that has the 40 weight in it. So again, that test works. I'm going to take out my 40 weight thread. I'm going to load my 60 weight thread because now it's a new weight. The tension's going to be completely different. So I'm going to grab this and I'm going to pull it up, and notice that. Look at that. Do you see how I pull that up? Let's get a close-up of that, Mr. Ritchie, please. There we go. What I want you to see now is the tension is more loose on this because it's a thinner thread. So now when I do my test, notice how it doesn't come all the way up. It actually only comes up part way. So for me, I want to get my 60 weight to the same place tension-wise that I had my 40 weight. Because I know the micro quilter 100 weight can take the regular tension of that. Now, I'm going to grab my screwdriver. And again, when we make our adjustment, these are minor, just a little, if it were hands on a clock, it'd be like half of a minute. So now I'm going to test it. Not bad. When I grab this, pull up, that is on the loose side of okay. But I want to take it just a smidge tighter. Because remember in that first video I showed that there's an area that you just kind of have to test a little bit. I'm going to take it just a smidge tighter. Okay, that feels good, but it still feels just a little loose. So I'm going to take it a little tighter. And sometimes what you do, just like we did with our tension, is you may want to just tighten it a little bit more until it just barely lifts off your hand. See, now that's nice. That gives me a nice pull, but it's not too loose. It was what might have seemed like it was okay, but it was a little too loose. I am going to give it just a little more. Okay, I like that. Bobbin case comes up on its side. Excuse my cough. But it still has a little bit of tension. And so now I'm going to call that good. And we'll do our test with the micro quilter on top and the glide 60 in the bobbin. You may choose bottom line, which is a 60 weight as well. That's up to you. You have to figure out what works for you. Okay, so now I have my micro quilter in the top and I have my 60 weight glide in the bobbin. So now I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to come down towards me, Mr. Ritchie. All right, and now I'm going to go ahead, pull my bobbin up. Now, I pulled my bobbin up, but this is a whole new bobbin thread that I've loaded, so I'm going to give it a pull. Everything feels good. So again, that was that final test whenever I change to a different type of bobbin that I like to try. So now I am going to take just a few stitches to lock it. Do a few back and forths. Okay, there we go. Let me trim my tail. All right, no marks. So I have no idea where my stitch is within the quilt sandwich. So I'm going to go up to the top. I'm going to tighten it one full turn because my goal is to get that bobbin up to the top. Okay, nothing. Turn it another turn. Okay, I'm starting to see it. I see a little bit of the black 60 weight. So let me turn it a quarter of a turn. Yep, it's there. So now I see that my thread is up to the top. So I pulled my bobbin thread up, if we want to adjust that shot to my foot. So I pulled that bobbin thread up to the top. And now I know where it's at. Now I'm simply going to back off my tension, so loosen it about a quarter to a half of a turn. And that's looking good. I'm going to go about another quarter of a turn. And that looks pretty darn good. I still see, though, a little bit of the bobbin thread in some of the points, so I'm going to back it off another quarter of a turn, because remember, we're dealing with a new type of weight of thread, 60 weight on bobbin and 100 weight on top. There we go. Now we've got it balanced. I'm not seeing any pokies. And again, I would be matching colors anyway, so if there was a pokey at this point, you'd never notice it. Now again, normally we would be using this for micro work, so I'd have my cruise mode on. And everything looks nice. I see a little bit of thread. I might back that up just another quarter of a stitch. Or I'm sorry, quarter of a turn. That's better. Okay, so just like before, well, no, I still see a pokey. Another quarter of a turn. This is the process. There we go. Now I've got some wonderful clean stitches. I know that it's still just under the surface of the quilt top, but not deep in the quilt sandwich that it's going to come out the bottom. Okay, so I have adjusted that. That is good now. So now what I'd like to do, we've tested 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different threads. This is the process that you're going to be doing just to kind of get familiar with how you're going to run your threads. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unpin this. We're going to flip this over and we're going to have a looky-see at the back to see how well things look on the back. Okay, so here, that was that first one that we were, where the tension was really off. And you can see with each of these, the tension looks great as we adjust our tension. Now, typically what you're going to see throughout this, now this would be the tension for the Sofine 50, and then we have the tension for the metallic. Looks great. For the invisible, that looks good. And then, of course, this is the 60 weight for the micro quilter, which, of course, I would have had on cruise for that particular thing to give it a little bit better stitches. And I would up my stitch length to about 13 stitches to 15 stitches per inch for my micro work with this. But again, so there is the backing. All right. So there we have it. There is our deep dive into how to adjust your tension so that it's perfect. And I think what you found is that it's fairly simple. The whole point is you have your bobbin tension, you have your top tension. You want to make sure that you're not torturing the thread so that you have a lot of breakage. What you want to make sure is that you pull the thread up to the top and that then you just back it off below your quilt top. And then you have the best way to get perfect tension quickly. And one of the things that we do as surface quilters is we tend to struggle horribly with tension. And it doesn't have to be horrible. If you just follow those few simple rules and quit trying to be mind readers with your quilt, you will have a lot less trouble. So I hope you've enjoyed that. I think that was a great few sessions to go over that. I know that we need to rehash, even as a seasoned quilter, it's good to rehash it and go back over it and kind of remember, and also to go to our shelves and pull down those rarely used threads and actually play with them a little bit so that we're not intimidated by them. And to see, is it a thread that my machine is going to like? Okay, so how timely is this? So somebody else threaded my machine this morning. And so what happened is, this is the machine that you have to wind one whole time around, even with the disc tensioner. And oddly enough, we just posted that second video tutorial. So I'm down here, and if you look at this real close, I could tell when I walked by because my stitches looked odd. Now I've already started to kind of take out. I love my Karen K. Buckley's. I just go under, grab a bit, snip it. I'm just careful though not to hit the fabric. And then I'll do those in a bunch of places. This will be easy to take out. But now I'm going to pause for just a second, then we're going to go around to the other side over by the tensioner, and I want to show you what I have to do with this machine to make it perfect. So now I'm over here. Here is our disc tensioner, of course. It is not a rotary tensioner. And this is, of course, my handy quilter. But this particular handy quilter likes it wrapped once. So I go behind. Come on. Behind. I want to make sure you can see what I'm doing. Come around and under. Now I do it just like I had done it, would do it normally. Now I go around there, under, and continue threading the normal path. Now I know that that thread is going to stay between the tension discs. What happens with this particular machine is, with the fine threads that I like to use, what happens with this machine, none of my other ones, and none of them in my lifetime actually, but I've had a few friends who have the same issue, is it'll work its way out of the disc tensioner and just kind of set on the outside, and that's when that happens. I'm glad I caught it because I am doing this crazy design. Mr. Patrick, if you come down and show them, I'm doing this psychotic design, frankly, that Mr. Patrick chose. So here we go. This is his quilt as well. So there we go. And I do not want to rip out a row of that stuff. Heck no. All right. Well, there we go. So live and learn. See, it even happens to me when I let somebody else thread my machine, not naming them any names. All right. Well, everybody, as I always say, know you're loved. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. We will see you all down the road. Goodbye, everybody.